Hello everyone and welcome back to Retro Tech HQ. Now on this channel so far we've talked a lot about the Commodore 64 and a lot about the ZX Spectrum, but we haven't talked about my first love. And no, I don't mean Samantha Fox. I mean my Atari 65XE, my very first computer. Now I've got lots of memories of this little computer, not least of which is walking to the newsagents on a Sunday afternoon with my dad, going in the shop and walking past the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum game sections to the Atari section, where I was allowed to take a look and pick out a game of my choice. Luckily for my dad, this wasn't an expensive thing to do, with each game only costing £1.99 or £2.99, and because of this I ended up with quite a lot of games. And so for this video I've picked out 10 games from those I had as a kid. This isn't intended to be a list of the best Atari 8-bit games, but rather a selection of games I remember playing a lot as a kid. Now if you recognise any of these games, please let me know in the comments below. Hopefully I'll trigger a few memories. And so first up, we've got a game called Dawn Raider. Now, according to the back of the cassette, we've got to fly our heavily armed helicopter gunship into the fortified complex of the super criminal that is holding the world to ransom with his nuclear armed rockets. This sounds a lot like the theme of most 80s films, but in reality, this one's a bit of a Scramble clone, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, a friend of mine back in the 80s had a Vectrex, and that had a brilliant port of Scramble on it, and we spent hours and hours playing that game. So whilst this isn't Scramble and it's not as good as Scramble, it's still a valiant attempt at a game like Scramble, and I did find myself getting very addicted to this. It's visually quite simple, I think it's quite an early game, but it's still enjoyable, and again for what it cost at the time, I think this was a £1.99 game. It wasn't too bad and it kept me happy for a few hours. Next up we've got Rockford, which is essentially a Boulder Dash game. Now reading the back of the cassette for this one, I actually learnt something. I mean, it actually states on the back here that this is the only true arcade version of the classic game Boulder Dash, and it says it was developed using all of the 16-bit power of the Amiga for Arcadia Systems arcade cabinets. Now this is really interesting to me because my next computer was actually an Amiga. I didn't realise that I was actually playing on my Atari 8-bit a game that had been developed using an Amiga, so there's a weird link up there that I find fascinating. And I played this game loads as a kid. Most of you that are watching will probably have played Boulder Dash, so you'll know just how much fun it is. And on the Atari 8-bits it runs great, it looks great and it plays brilliantly. In fact, I loaded this one up with the intention of getting a 10-minute clip for this video, but found myself playing it for an hour. Okay, so moving on, we've got a game that's just called Ninja. Now, back in the 80s, ninjas were cool. They were in lots of films. It's what we talked about at school. We all talked about nunchucks and throwing stars and things like that. So when I saw a game called Ninja, I just couldn't resist. Now, this one doesn't say much on the back of the cassette. It just says Ninja. It blasts the black belt of all other martial arts games. Now, I'm not sure that's entirely true, and I'm pretty sure there are games like Shinobi that would disagree, but I did enjoy revisiting this one, and as you can tell from the video footage, it took me a while to figure out the controls, and I did spend quite a lot of time jumping around the screen, but I enjoyed playing this. At least I did until this happened. Next up, we've got LA SWAT, and this is another one that's gone over the top 80s storyline, and it goes something like this. Rescue the hostages from the terrorist gangs holding out in West LA. Clean up the streets, blow away the bad guys and be a hero on network TV. Foul and you won't be coming home to watch it. This one's a vertical shooter and reminds me a lot of a very early Commando or Ikari Warriors. It's good fun. You walk up the screen armed with a machine gun whilst the bad guys lob grenades at you. And now this might sound a bit weird, but I remember being really impressed by the animation each time you shoot a bad guy. We were easier to please back then. Okay, with that said, let's move on to the next game, and we've got BMX Simulator. Now, back in the 80s, Codemasters seemed to be doing simulators for everything. You could get a fruit machine simulator, SAS simulator, Pro Powerboat simulator, Super Tank simulator, ATV simulator. In my case, the only one I had was the BMX Simulator, which is a game I played a lot. And do let me know in the comments below if you had any of the Codemasters games, any of the simulation series at all. I'd be keen to hear about that. On the Atari 8-bit we got some of the early ones, but in the later 80s we didn't get the ones that were coming out on the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum, so I haven't played a lot of them. So if there are any in particular that you'd recommend, please do let me know. Now back to BMX Simulator. This had a really cool feature that I hadn't seen on any other game at the time, and that was an action replay mode. This blew my 9-year-old brain at the time, and not only did it have an action replay mode, it also had a slow-mo mode as well. Impressive stuff for 1986. Now this next game needs no introduction. It's the one and only Ghostbusters. Possibly one of my favourite films of all time, and even this game, which is a big licensed game, only cost $2.99. Wow, digitised speech. It's hard to explain how impressive this was at the time. We were used to beeps, boops and chip music, so to hear actual speech in a game was seriously impressive. And the game itself wasn't bad either. Load up your vehicle with traps, check the map and go bust some ghosts. It was more complicated than that of course, but in reality all I really cared about was catching Slimer. And as much as I enjoyed this game, it's one of those I think could have been better. It was such a big franchise. Let me know if you agree in the comments below. And this is another game that needs no introduction, the one and only Donkey Kong. Now it's really weird to me to see a Nintendo game on an Atari cartridge. It's not something you could ever imagine happening nowadays, but back then they seemed to be able to cooperate. And I played this a lot. It's a very simple game. Everyone will have played it. You all will have played it. And so you'll all know just how much fun this is. And on the Atari, it's an absolutely brilliant port. It plays at the right speed. It controls really well. It's really good fun. It's got both levels, and I think there are only 2 levels in the arcade. Correct me if I'm wrong. So again, I spent a lot of time playing this, seeing if I could beat the high score. Now you can see here that I'm just about to save the princess, which is such a big deal. And if you've never saved the princess from Donkey Kong, you need to get out there and do that right now. It's make it one of your life goals. But seriously, this one's a timeless classic, and I can highly recommend it if you've got an Atari 8-bit. Next up, we've got Joe Blade, and those pesky terrorists have been at it again according to the back of the cassette. In this case, the terrorists have kidnapped 6 world leaders. You, Joe Blade, are their only hope. You must enter Bloodfinger's base, liberate the hostages, prime the explosives and make your escape. Now this is another one of those games that I remember thinking looked amazing at the time. The sprites were huge compared to what I was used to at the time. The designers of this did a really great job of using the hardware properly. And whilst I played this loads, I don't remember getting very far, mostly because my 9-year-old brain didn't understand the puzzles in this game. Oh well, I still love loading this up to admire the graphics. And talking of graphics, this next game, Xybex, has some of the best graphics I've seen on the Atari 8-bit. It's a slightly later game, coming out in 1988, which perhaps explains why it looks so much better than games like Dawn Raider. And to really appreciate the visuals in this game, you've got to try and imagine it with much smaller pixels on my 14-inch CRT that I had at the time. Instead of flat blocky enemies, we've got these pseudo 3D enemies to blast at. And one of the reasons I played this game so much was that it has a co-op mode, so you could team up with a friend to blast enemies. But be warned, this game is hard, very hard. And that brings us to the last game in this video, Loadrunner. This is one of those games that looks relatively simple from a visuals perspective, but has really got it where it counts, in the gameplay department. It's so good in fact that my other half wanted to go. That was a mistake, because I couldn't get on the Atari for the next hour. She was instantly hooked and developed one more go syndrome. It's the little touches that differentiate this game from most other collect and evade type games. Your character moves at just the right speed, so you're outnumbered but move faster than your pursuers. This in turn means that your brain is always working out whether you can get to the next treasure in time. You can also dig holes to trap your pursuers. This is important because sometimes they'll pick up treasure and the only way to get it back off them is to trap them in a hole. It's lots of little touches that make Loadrunner a very fun, very addictive game. And that brings us to the end of this video. Now I've got lots more Atari games, so if you like this video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. Also, please let me know in the comments below if you've played any of these games or have any requests for the next video. With that said, thanks for watching and I'll be back soon with another video.